What are your roommate horror stories? Not me, but my cousin had a roommate her freshman year of college that had to listen to Harry Potter Book 1 on tape every single night to fall asleep. My cousin bought her headphones but she refused to wear them because they hurt her ears. She would play it on a portable speaker loud enough to keep my cousin awake all night. The worst part? She wouldn't even start the tape where she left off the previous night, she would play the beginning every night over and over again. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive. Edit # It gets worse. Turns out the roommate wasn't even a fan of the series, had never watched any of the movies or read the other books, didn't know any characters, and as far as my cousin knows she never even finished the first book because she'd fall asleep every time she started it. A very sheltered roommate I had living downstairs was very open about her singing. She had no shame and talent to match. Singing Cher's Believe was one of her Saturday morning go-tos. Hey, it could be worse, right? Well, maybe. 5 a.m. is just too early for Cher. But what was most disturbing was her Backstreet Boys rendition of I Want It That Way. This is when things get odd. Maybe she was just trolling me, but she would belt out this tune when she got ready for bed after an evening shift. The odd thing about it was how long she would sing it for. There were nights where I would wake up at 4 a.m. and she was still singing. Just as bad and just as passionate. I had enough. I went downstairs to ask her to wait until morning. But it was dark. No lights at all. Even in her room it was dark. 4 a.m. and she's singing her heart out in bed. So I knock and the singing stops. She opens the door all confused and she barely has a voice left. The next morning I apologize for surprising her, but I couldn't sleep with all her Backstreet Boys singing. She doesn't understand what I'm talking about, but it suddenly occurred to me that she was singing in her sleep. Every night. So how could I expect her to just not sing in her sleep? Maybe she was trolling me. But for 8 months this little woman with no friends and no family close by, sung Backstreet Boys in her sleep. I used to live with 3 other girls. I got along with one of them really well, but the other 2 were casual friends at best. I know most people like to say that they're the one who does the dishes the most, but generally it was me that took care of it. I did them about twice a week because they just piled up every couple of days and nobody would touch them. No big deal. I figured that everybody has different rates for when they want to do dishes, and if my roommates only wanted them washed once a week or so, then I was the odd man out for wanting them cleaned twice a week. So I usually just ended up doing it myself. I didn't mind. We had a lot of other little conflicts over the semester, but I always kind of prided ourselves on the fact that we never had a quarrel about dishes. Fast forward a year, I'm living with some new roommates who are friends with the old ones. I'm telling them about the dishes, and how I felt that if somebody in the apartment wants a certain chore to be done a certain way, they should do it themselves and not expect everyone else to cater to their need if nobody else cares about it. One of them gets a weird look on their face and I ask what's up. She says those girls said you never did the dishes. They said you let them sit in the sink for 3 days without cleaning them. Turns out that the girls in the apartment really wanted the dishes done every day, but they were too passive-aggressive to actually talk to each other about it. So they just let them sit in the sink for 3 days until somebody cracked and did them as punishment. It was absurd. You're a 20-year-old woman and you can't talk to your roommates about some dishes? My old roommate was dating a good friend of mine. One day, after her spending the night, they went out for lunch. His dog came out of his room with a tissue in her mouth. I stopped her, grabbed it and went to throw it out when my hand felt really wet. It was a condom, fully loaded, and when I grabbed it I guess I squeezed it because my hand was now covered in my roommate's cum. It's been years and I still haven't told him about it. You need to maintain a strong relationship with him so that he invites you to his wedding and you tell his wife/husband/robo-spouse during slightly drunk phase of the wedding party. Let me start by saying I am handicapped, and when I am not in my wheelchair I get myself around by scooting/crawling. I should also mention the roommates were my best friend for 10 years and her boyfriend. Before we moved in together my roommates were talking about wanting to get a dog. No problem. I love animals. I did however request that they do not get a large dog because I feared it knocking me down/over while I am out of my wheelchair. I also lived in the basement of the house and worried that the dog may knock me down the steps when I would scoot up to the kitchen. They ended up getting a pit bull. I have nothing but good things to say about the breed. However, it was a young dog that had not been spayed. She was hyper constantly and they had to keep her from jumping on me all the time. They would barely take the dog out for walks because they're terrible, lazy pet owners. We had a deck that I kept my wheelchair under because I was unable to store it in my home. They would let the dog out on the deck where she would use the bathroom. One day I was heading off to class and my chair was saturated in dog piss. After I explained what happened, they still continued to let the dog do her business on the deck because they're the most ignorant people I know. Another time I came home late and there was trash juice all over the steps and down the hallway that I had to scoot through to get to my room. That night my boyfriend at the time left a note in big bold letters on the fridge that read, "Clean up the trash juice in the hall." They started an argument saying, "You didn't have to put it that way," and write in all caps. That's literally what they wanted to argue about. My ex-best friend had super long hair and it was everywhere in the bathroom. I asked her repeatedly to clean the hair out of the tub every time she showered. I had to explain to her that, I do not have a shower chair and I do not stand in the shower, so if you don't clean it, your hair sticks to me. Halfway through the year one of them lost their job and would not pay for their share of gas and electric and internet. When we would pay the rent they would throw away the receipts even though I managed all of the finances. At some point my ex-best friend's mother was staying with us completely free for the last 4 months I lived there, and she slept in the guest bedroom where I had a spare single bed. The day I packed up to move her and her mother argued I was a shitty person because I was taking a place to sleep right out from underneath of the mom. Like I wasn't going to take all of my things when I moved? When I tried to discuss it reasonably like an adult they would childishly ignore me or walk away. So I packed everything and got the hell out. They never paid their share of the security deposit and I never got it back because they cut up the house by being general slobs and the dog ruined the deck. I came home after work one morning to smoke barreling out of my oven. My roommate left a pizza cooking all night while passed out drunk. He lived through the smoke, but everything I owned including all my furniture and property reeked of putrid smoke for 3 weeks. My roommate did that, except I was still awake and knew what he did. I split the pizza with 2 other people. I had a few roommates when I was living in the dorms my freshman year in college. They were good people all in all and we had some good times, but as with just about every college experience for most of us, there was one guy who liked to drink, a lot. One night I came home at like 3 in the morning to find our drunk roommate just standing over one of our other roommates' beds, staring at him awkwardly in the sod Walking Dead looking stupor. I could tell he was plastered because he was kinda rocking around in silence in the dark. Honestly it was a bit creepy, so I called out to him in a whisper, "Mike." He turned his head towards me relatively quickly, head bobbing all around, and slowly raised his finger in front of his mouth, and quietly shed me like Kin Elmer Fudd hunting rabbits. He held his finger there for another few seconds and, nearly incoherently, muttered, "Duck this guy." If you could permit me to quickly paint a picture of what Mike looked like, and what Rob looked like, you'll understand why this was a really huge problem. They were as polar opposite as you could imagine, in just about every capacity. Mike was a surfer from Los Angeles, shorter, skinnier kid, with long hair and a stoner attitude. Rob on the other hand grew up on a farm and was substantially larger and substantially more fit than Mike, and he never get around. Dude was serious, always. Now, Mike must have already had it out without me noticing because he was primed and ready to fire without me even realizing what was going on. All I heard was the sound of water hitting cloth, and that's when I saw it. He had started to pee on Rob, who up until that moment was fast asleep. Rob, waking up to what he thought was just warm water, quickly realized what was happening and proceeded to jump out of bed and grabbed Mike, who was still peeing on him up until this point, and threw him across the room, off the far wall. He looked like a duckkin ragdoll bouncing off the wall, hitting the desk below, and then onto the ground. Mike didn't say a word. He stood up, quietly tucked himself in, and proceeded to walk right past Rob, and climb back into his bed. Rob looked at me, looked at our other roommate who was now awake behind me, and looked back at Mike. All of us had this dumbfounded look on our face except Mike, who was of course within seconds, already starting to quietly snore. I honestly will never forget the sight of Rob standing there in the middle of the room with urine dripping down his face, off his shoulders and down his arms, with this absolute befuddled look on his face, as he tried to process what the duck just happened. I think it angered him more to hear Mike snoring because he angrily turned to his bed and tried to wake him up by shaking him, violently at first and then hitting him in his back, arms and head. Nothing. Mike was out cold. The rest of the year went as you could imagine. It was an experience. I spent a summer living at a friend's house and it almost had me in tears. I go to school far away from my home and decided to stay the summer in my school area. Thing was the dorms kick you out from May to August, so I had to fence a summer home for a few months. My friend offered to let me stay at her house. Very cheap rent and cool. I moved in. Now I had already known she was a messy person and had accepted that fact, and I'd do my best to keep my space and the common space clean. Well, it was just a disaster from start to finish. She has 3 dogs, great animals, but the amount of hair and dirt they produce, you had to sweep and vacuumed once a week, aka I swept and vacuumed. She didn't work, I did, full-time server. She never cleaned, once. I did the dishes, I mopped the floors, I took care of the dogs. She kept the dogs crated all the time for no reason. She was always home, yet I'd get home and have to let them out. They weren't even my dogs, I just felt so bad for them. I would come home 10 p.m. from working all day, make dinner, clean the kitchen and go to bed. Wake up to her having had people over that night, probably getting high, drunk, whatever, and the kitchen is now trashed with fast food and dishes. So I'd get to clean again just so I could make breakfast. Oh yeah, her friends, really nice people all around, but they would come over all the time. They would come over unannounced and walk right in. No knocking, nothing. I once was doing laundry and had bras and underwear all over the living room. They just showed up with no warning and sat on my clean laundry. I was in the shower. Eventually I just gave up, other than taking care of the dogs. I kept my room and bathroom clean and just stayed out of the house as much as possible. King horrible. Is that a raw chicken breast on the tap in the bathroom? One of my roommates on seeing a raw chicken breast left on the bathroom tap by my other roommate. Not so much a nightmare roommate, but I had a ridiculously sheltered and possibly OCD freshman year roommate. In our dorm, the most popular layout of furniture to maximize the space in the room without bunking the beds was putting them in an L shape so that one was against the wall with the window, leaving a nice area of open space to hang out in the center of the room. Her mother decided we were not allowed to do this because one of us might roll over in our sleep and fall out the window to our demise 10 floors below. Mind you, the window was 2 feet above the level of the bed and bolted shut. Every night before we went to sleep, Rumi would lock the door, turn the handle to the right, pull on the door 3 times, turn left, pull 3 times, turn right again and pull 3 times. Every single night. One day I had just taken out the trash and shortly after thrown out some scrap paper in the bin next to our sink. Rumi went to brush her teeth and accidentally knocked her toothbrush into said bin. Rumi proceeds to call her mother to ask whether she should wash off her toothbrush and use it or throw it away and buy a new. She and her mother discuss the topic for about 10 minutes, with Rumi describing the contents of the bin and exactly how long the toothbrush spent in there. Mom apparently then transfers the call to Rumi's dad, and the conversation repeats. After discussing the matter at length, it was decided that Rumi should buy a new toothbrush. Nice girl, felt bad for her. Hope she was able to branch out a bit. Had a roommate freshman year in a shared room who was training for a bodybuilding competition. He would wake up at 5, make a ton of noise, go for a run, come back at 6, go to the gym, come back and pose in front of the mirror, sometimes in the nude, all while I was clearly awake. He would also go to bed at 8 p.m. and get pissed if any noise was made. The clicking of the keys on my phone once set him off because he needed beauty rest. That first part didn't sound so bad. Yeah, not bad until everything else. And as a freshman I wanted to do things past 10 p.m., weird I know. Currently dealing with the aftermath of a roommate from hell. Roommate L landed a job out of town for the summer and found Jay to take over her lease for 3 months. Jay had 2 jobs, seemed responsible, and for the first month or so we all liked her. She was nice, social, did weird things like use toilet paper bizarrely quickly, but otherwise she seemed fine. Roommate R shares the basement with Jay, and R threw a small birthday party for a friend one night. Jay proceeded to invite the entire college basketball and football teams to our small house. Approximately 50 strangers showed up inebriated and screaming all over the neighborhood. The rental manager was called and the uninvited football giants were kicked out. Jay never apologized, and after that, we avoided her as much as possible, just waiting for her to move out. About 2 weeks ago, rent was due and Jay didn't pay. Rent is still the 10% of her monthly income. After rent was late a few days, she offered the excuse that someone had stolen her debit card and cleared out her account, and that she was working with the police and her bank for a refund. Around the same time, R received a snapshot of Jay wearing one of R's shirts. She had taken it out of R's room. I advised R to check her room for more missing things. She quickly realized that $200 was missing from the opaque black jar she kept tips in. It was hidden in an inconspicuous place. Someone would have had to really search for it. We immediately suspected Jay and set up R's camera to record video while R was at work. I worked from home and was there when Jay came home and stole $20 from a jar R had set up in the room. Unfortunately, the camera overheated and didn't catch Jay in the act. Jay was again confronted about her late rent and missed repeated scheduled meetings with rental managers because her mother was in the hospital. Jay told me her mom had tried to kill herself. She told rental managers she had breast cancer. She told a friend her mother wasn't in the hospital at all. She also told friends that money had been stolen from her room and that she had set up a camera to catch the thief in the act. R hid the tip jar in a dirty laundry basket in her closet until she could get to the bank. When she took it out, $300 more were missing. We called the police, and while they couldn't do much, they advised us to confront Jay and get her to confess. Jay was evicted for late rent and given a 3-day notice to exit the premises. She agreed to meet with R and me to discuss the stolen money, but didn't arrive when she'd said she would, as we expected. She snuck into the house later that day. I happened to hear her and cornered her, calling the rental managers and R. We confronted Jay and she confessed to stealing over $650 from R and agreed to pay the amount back the next day. Next day she texts R and says she can only pay her $100. R is pressing charges and Jay has been trespassed from our property. It's been a wild few weeks. The worst part of the whole ordeal was how Jay acted. Lie after lie after lie, more unbelievable than the next. She showed absolutely no remorse and kept talking about the situation as if it had been caused by someone else, i.e., "I'm sorry this happened to you." Talking to her, I got the sinking feeling that she didn't have a conscience and that she felt she had a right to the money. It didn't feel like I was talking to an actual person. I honestly feel bad for the girl. She has effectively ruined her life and needs serious help. TLDR, my compulsive liar roommate stole hundreds of dollars from my other roommate and made our lives a living hell. Edit. At a party this weekend, Jay bragged to several people about stealing the money. Previous roommates have come forward saying Jay stole from them and used the same excuses of her debit card being stolen and her mom being in the hospital. Jay told some of her friends that one of her roommates had stolen $400 from her room and that she had set up a camera to catch them. And her former coworker at a car dealership says she stole a car. Thanks for listening to another episode of Reddit X. Subscribe and activate the notification bell so you won't miss any stories. Feel free to share your own stories below in the comments. Have a good day.